Do you have an all-star HR team? You may feel your team is already performing at a high level, but let's take a closer look. Would your company's top leaders and employees agree that your HR team are operating at a high level? Are team members able to influence top executives on difficult topics? Are team members business and strategy focused on the challenges the organization is facing? Does the executive team trust your direct reports as advisors on human capital issues? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have built an outstanding team. If you feel there is room for improvement, Strategy Focused Group can create a custom development program to elevate the quality of your HR team. Please email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series where we explore career journeys. And our guest today is Abdulhussan Tejani, a global change architect with years of experience in leadership and HR across Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Matter of fact, he's talking to us now from Tanzania. He has led HR and learning from organizations such as Standard Chartered Bank, BP, Merck Sharp, and Dome, Jim's Education before launching his Dubai-based consultancy, People Matters. He's known for his deep expertise in change management, leadership development, emotional intelligence, and organizational transformation, all delivered with a storyteller's heart and people-first philosophy. One of the things I want to say, follow him on LinkedIn because he does some amazing storytelling. Couple of times a week, sometimes a week, whenever he's feeling it, but it's always on point. So my friend, and not only that, but he's a longtime business partner of mine, and we've been together for 7-8 years in some capacity in some way or the other. So with that, AT, how are you, man?
Thank you very much, Ron. Much appreciated. And again, I don't even think that this is a podcast. I'm thinking of this as having coffee on your side and I'm having tea on my side.
Yeah, we do that so often. That's what I was telling you earlier. We need to get back and do that because we haven't done it in a while. So walk us through Tanzania to now as an organizational guru. What was that like? Walk us through it.
All right. So I originally studied in the UK, and after studying, I actually came down to Tanzania. And the challenge I had was HR was not really well developed in those years in Tanzania. It was more admin related. So I tried my level best to kind of merge my theoretical thinking with what really helps individuals out there. And that took me through initially training and development until I joined BP, the oil company. And that's where I got a really good taste of what core HR is all about. And my journey really began there before I moved on to Standard Chartered Bank here in Tanzania as the head of HR, and eventually made my move to Dubai in 2002, where, as you pointed out right from the outset, I've held various roles as head of HR or director or vice president in terms of regional positions. So obviously well-traveled, but I think one of the things that I've learned over time is I love to learn. So that is my lifelong journey. I love to read, I love to teach so that I can learn from other people.
Yeah, loving to learn. I've said the same thing, because, you talk with people. Sometimes I'll ask leaders, I said, what are you reading? What does that look like? What does your reading list look like? I'm so busy, I don't get a chance to read. I said, so how do you learn? I'm tied up 24/7. So that kind of gives me an indication of kind of where their mindset is. So when you talk about that, what were the highs and lows? What was the biggest jump that you were proud of? And then I'll flip it and say, what was the decision you made may not have worked out the way that you thought it was going to work out?
Well, believe it or not, I would actually pick the same story as a high and as a low. And okay. I'll explain why. So when I was working with BP in Tanzania in those days, as I mentioned, most HR people tended to be admin in nature. And I tried to actually break that mold to move into the sort of strategic arena of HR. And with BP, I was very fortunate in that I had an amazing person who believed in me. And she gave me that ability to go out there and learn it the way it ought to be. And so the high for me was to actually being chosen by BP to actually partake in a global project. And I was the only representative for Africa, despite the fact that I'd only joined the organization 2 months prior to that. So this lady saw potential and put me on a global project. So I was globe-trotting within 2 months of joining BP. And interestingly, obviously, I learned a lot in that little time that I spent there. The flip side of that story is because I was seen as somebody who was strategic in nature, my managing director at BP was very good friends with the managing director at Standard Chartered. And my office used to be just outside the MD's office. So every time this guy came around, he would actually come and say hello to me. And my MD would tell him what an amazing guy I am. I'm not sure whether that was just being, honest, or he's just trying to pull his string as such. And before long, this guy reached out to me and said, I'd like you to come and work for Standard Chartered. So I said, look, I'm quite happy where I am. He says, listen, you'll say no, right? But let's talk. So I did, and we got talking. And the day he put an offer in front of me was about 4 times my salary at BP. And I'm like, are you serious? He said, absolutely. He says, the only way you're going to come and work for me is if you go and tell your MD that you are quitting and that I did not chase you. So that was about the only time in my life where I made a choice based purely on financial terminology as such. I'm glad I did make that jump, even though it was for the wrong reason in my opinion. But again, I learned a lot at Standard Chartered because, again, there I had an amazing mentor who taught me completely what I know as strategic HR today. And that was the foundation.
You've mentioned mentor. You said the person that you were working with at the first job saw something in you and was always kind of there and proposed you for this project 2 months after being there. What do you think that was about? You ever had a conversation with this mentor? I'm going to say mentor, as to what did they see in you? What were you exhibiting?
Well, she was one tough lady. She was the HR director for Africa. Her name was Irene Juncker. And I remember going down for my onboarding in Cape Town in South Africa, which was the head office where she was based. And she gave me a really tough time. And I think the fact that I was able to withstand that outlash as such really held me in good stead in her eyes. And the other thing was I never shied from asking the questions that most people wouldn't dare to ask because they were either scared of her or they felt if I asked, I'd look stupid. I never shied away from that. And there were times when we was there for the whole week of onboarding, when we had sort of meetings. I actually challenged some of the thinking that went on in terms of what has already been put in place. And I said, why do you think this will work? I mean, I don't see that happening. Are we actually addressing people, or are we addressing a process? Are we trying to make ourselves look good? Because at the end of the day, we need to actually make sure that we're delivering on a business objective. I don't see that connection. And all of that, I think, is what held me in good stead in her eyes. And she pushed me despite the fact that there were people out there who were way more capable than me.
You know, I'm going to say, to challenge a leader who was already tough, and you decided to just ask the question, because lots of times in meetings, people are thinking things, but they would never bring it up and ask the question. Where did that come from? Was that through upbringing and say, you know what, I'm just going to say what I'm going to say?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I mean, when I was studying in the UK, I had some very good lecturers, and these lecturers encouraged us to be vocal. But what I also learned in that particular instance, whilst being in the UK, is how to actually ask the question with emotional intelligence and never to lose that cool that you have, and ensure that you're respectful with the other person. And that for me is the formula that allows you to have these difficult conversations. Now, if you don't ask, then you have to live with the consequences of not asking. So you either make a choice to do something where there's a consequence, or you don't do anything and there's a consequence. Which price is worth paying for?
So the learnings you got from that, because you're working on a project now, we were just talking before we came live on having difficult conversations. So you're kind of a PhD in that because you live that.
Well, I try. And that's one of the reasons why I focus really extensively on emotional intelligence, because I think it's really an underrated skill. And although everyone knows about it, everyone talks about it, very few practice it. And I've been a student of it for over 15 years. And I still think I've got a long way to go in terms of how we can embed that into our lives. But I think that is key. If you actually think about the reports that are coming out with the advent of AI, one of the things they're all saying is that emotional intelligence is continue to live way beyond the AI revolution as such. So as far as I'm concerned, that is fundamental.
Yeah. That's being discussed. And the thing that bothers me, I think, when you talk about emotional intelligence, I look at it as a buzzword, because everybody's writing about buzzword. Everybody's talking about AI buzzword, and we keep getting caught up on these buzzwords. But how many of us are using that to interpret? I wrote an article about, my father would always say, when you're in a room, just be quiet and listen and try and get an understanding of the room. He didn't understand the concept of what I call reading a room, to see who does this,
Right.
who's quiet, but who could be quiet, introspective, but that person carries a lot of weight. And it's kind of sizing it up. Is that kind of the way you approach it?
So one of the things I have learned in all my years of experience and in learning emotional intelligence is, when it comes to communication, yes, listening is important, but more importantly than what is being said is to hear the unheard. If you can master that, you're actually doing exactly what you have just described right now, which is being silent and seeing the unseen as such.
Listening through navigation. What was the meaning behind saying that? I asked someone, I said, why did you use that word? I said, what do you mean use that word? I said, because that word has such negative connotation. Is there particular reasons? And it kind of threw them off their pedestal, and they were trying to come back to and say, I never thought of it that way. I said, because to me, I picked it up as a negative word, as opposed to the discussion we were having, or something out of sync in doing that. So you've learned a lot from coming out of university and having this situation with these two leaders, and moving on with your life and doing what you're doing now. Do you see it as a great foundation with the mentors that you've had, that you can reference those points and consistently keep moving on?
Well, the way I kind of run my life is I always have mentors. I have a mentor till today as well. All right. So even at my advanced age, even though I have had a lot of 23 years of experience in the corporate world and 8 years in my consulting, I still have somebody who is my go-to person. This is a guy called Dave Borham, based out of South Africa. And believe it or not, I also am picking up a lot in the last sort of 9 years that you and I have been associating. I've picked up a lot from you as well. So from my perspective, if you stop learning, you stop growing. So if you really genuinely want to be able to add value to people's lives, you don't stop at where you are. You keep growing yourself to help them grow. That's one of the reasons why I read extensively, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't know it all. In fact, I know less than what most people do, but I just learned to present it in a historical kind of way that makes it impactful for a lot of the people I train or coach.
You know, you mentioned that the relationship between the two of us. We've had these coffee chats for years,
Yeah.
and there's no agenda. We're just talking about things, and I'm sharing with you, you're sharing with me, back and forth. And sometimes you need a sounding board.
You do.
And the sounding board is when I go. We meet normally, you know, near where I live here, and we'll go to Costa, and we sit there for hours, and we just talk about. And the conversation keeps going. It keeps going in all the different directions, but there's learning coming from all of it. So I come back to you and say the same thing, because it's always a learning point for me when I'm walking back home.
For me, I look at everyone as being a teacher. If I tell you how much I've learned from my daughters, you'll be amazed.
Yeah.
I use my daughters extensively in my training or coaching as examples, because a lot of the challenges we're facing today has got to do with the fact that we're working with different generations, and what works for one doesn't work for the other. And we need to learn to navigate that kind of stuff. And believe it or not, I learned the same thing from my wife, who sometimes gives me insights that I don't even realize are insights until she points it out to me. So that's why I said in my journey of emotional intelligence, I've got a long way to go. And even then, I'm one of those people who consciously tries to learn about it.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that about your daughter, because my daughter and my son are learning. I'll say something. Listen, dude, could you read? What did you just say? And it's kind of like you go back to school. I'm like, well, I was just thinking. Listen, no. Here's the thought. So it's kind of like understanding that learning can come from any place, because you brought that up, but lots of times when we run into executives all the time, they got it all figured out. Their team, to them, will never question what they're saying. So they're running through life and figuring they know everything. So here's kind of an interesting story from Marshall Goldsmith, who's a friend of mine. And Marshall told a story that he was working with a C-suite executive, and one of the kind of nuances that he do whenever he's coaching someone, he wants to speak to their direct reports, but he also wants to spend some time talking with the family. And one executive says, "There's no way, that's off limits. Would never be able to do that." And then he talked about the learnings that when he was able to talk to these the wife, the kids, talking about how collaborative he is on making decisions. Listen, this is a different person. He's nowhere near like that. So when you balance that off and having those kind of conversations, that I'm kind of happy you said it, because I always tell the stories of my daughter, what they pulled my coat and said, "You can't do that anymore."
You know, the challenge a lot of people face is we have one persona for the home, one persona for the office, one persona for your place of worship, another persona when you're with friends. And when you actually have different personas, you're okay as long as they don't intersect. The day they do intersect, it's a major problem. So for me, that is stressful for a lot of people when that intersection does happen. So why do you need different personas when you can actually have one persona across all different entities as such? So that's why I want to make sure that when I'm talking about my family, I'm talking about it from a perspective of what transpires within a family sort of setup is the same that happens at work, given the amount of time we spend at work. All right, we spend sometimes more time at work than we do with our families. So we need to think of that as an extension of our family. So you cannot have different personalities in those two different domains.
If you were giving a keynote to the so-called C-suite that were in attendance, and you were talking about this new world of work coming in, technology situation is going to disrupt everything, what would be 2 or 3 bullet points that you would want to leave them with?
Well, I think when you think about the C-suite, I think for me, one of the most important things is to understand their job ideally is not operational in nature. It's to be visionaries and to be enablers of the talent that sit under them. All right. And a lot of C-suite people tend to sort of dabble on everything. They want to be in control of everything. And for me, that's unacceptable. So for me, that's one of the biggest changes I would want to see in the C-suite. The second thing that I really want them to understand and to coach their people is the new work rules that are coming up, and in a lot of instances is already there, is the future of work is where businesses are going to be HR people doing some business, and HR people are going to be business people doing some HR. All right.
Exactly.
And that flip is so important for them to understand, because every time they think about reducing an HR sort of headcount, they need to understand that you're not making it easier for yourself. So you need to start to understand that if you played the role correctly, then these guys will enable you to ensure that they're able to manage the talent that exists within your organization in a way that is productive and equivalent to the business objective that needs to be achieved. The third thing that I genuinely want to see the C-suite inculcate in their characteristic is, guys, you are at the top. You don't need to fear anybody. Bring some empathy back to work, right? It's not like somebody is just waiting for somebody to make a mistake and they pounce on them. All right. Nobody reached the top without making a mistake. So I want to see empathy incorporate itself into the way we function in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm. Leaders and what they get wrong. I'm doing a keynote next Monday here in Dubai for a group coming out of Africa. It's an Africa HR conference that they're having here. And that was one of the things I was thinking about when you talk about business first. And I said, if you think of Superman, Superman has the shirt with the S on it. I said, you never want to be perceived as a person that has the HR t-shirt on. You want to be perceived as a person that has the business alignment, the business shirt on, and the background is HR, looking it through that lens. And that's kind of the keynote of my speech, because I was working on thinking about something, and that was the first thing I found. I found a business HR, and that branding behind that, using the old metaphor of the Superman piece again to the audience upstairs, because I think in a lot of cases we're misused and we're not viewed in that light. But a lot of that comes from generational, because we kind of you talked about when you first got out and was doing HR, it was all admin process and those kind of things, and you move beyond that. So if you were talking to heads of HR, CHROs, because they're struggling today. I just read a report that the turnover level at the CHRO CPO level is the highest it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because navigating through what we're going through now is going to take a different skill set. In a lot of cases, the people that they may have inherited, they don't have that skill. So if I flip that audience and we were now talking to CHROs, CPOs, what would that conversation look like? What would be some key points that you'd leave them with?
Well, I personally think one of the things that most talented CHROs at that level do very well is manage downwards. All right. What they struggle with is managing upwards, is to be able to sell that story to those people that ideally need to sponsor these changes. If they can't do that, then they have a serious challenge of making it work in terms of the change. So that is a conversation that not many want to have with an MD or a managing director or a board as such. And the other thing that we need to learn to do extremely well as CHROs is you need to learn to understand how to talk numbers. You can't just throw niceties. All right. So if you are going to tell them this is the advantage of buying a new ERP system, all right, it's not going to help. It's about you being able to say, listen, do you know we're actually spending $500,000 recreating work on a yearly basis because we don't have an ERP? And if you're able to work that out and prove it, all right, you get to the stage where you're actually mastering the art of consulting, which is never sell the benefits, always sell the cost of not doing it.
Exactly. I call it evidence-based approach. I did a project last week, I think it was, with Dubai airports, and I took their entire HR team through people analytics from an evidence-based approach. It wasn't the one that we normally use in our certified session, but it was one I custom built for them to understand it's about the business. You know, what develop a why statement. What is a communication strategy? Just because you've got this not certification, but you've got this knowledge, how are they going to know that? And one of the things you mentioned was, how are you going to communicate that through the organization? How are you going to communicate that through our clients? When I left Martha Stewart, I went to work for Xerox, and I managed one of the consulting practices. It was such eye-opening, but I enjoyed it because of the fact you had to go in and client gave you a problem. How do you break it down into pieces, and how do you begin building up an approach and come back to them, and you eventually able to sell that, and then you come in and do the intervention or whatever it is, and then they can look back and say, we were here and now we're here. Those are numbers behind that. And I think that's one of the key things that's missing, even when you talk about universities that teach human resources, because they're so busy focused on things, and the people up here are looking for something else.
Well, it's interesting you talk about universities, but recently I had a conversation with somebody quite influential in the UAE, and I was asking them, you were sending a lot of Emiratis abroad to go and study. You bring those universities into the UAE. And the guy turned around and said something to me that was really powerful and got me thinking. He said, I don't think the future of education is in university. It's in getting short courses in to enable individuals to focus on what really matters. Because if you have to spend 4 years to learn stuff that are obsolete within 2 years of you finishing, it's not really helpful. So I'd rather work with something that actually gives these people probably soft skills that will help them build a foundation, and eventually at the end give them the specialized skills that will help them in what they wish to specialize in. And I thought that was quite profound.
Yeah, that is profound. And that's one of I have an article coming out tomorrow, but what triggered me was the fact that I keep reading all of these layoffs and layoffs and layoffs. And I said, that's impacted so many different functions. Education is number one, because you're selling the dream of getting a 4-year degree and coming to do what? Because a lot of the grunt work is going to be done through AI or some other capabilities. Yeah. How do we build the next level of leaders in doing that? Now, one of our prior guests on the show, Vital, he went to Michigan State, a University of Michigan. He's been there for like 2 years, and he's thinking about just dropping out because they created a startup, and the startup is doing well, and he was working on that project, and the thirst from that was so exciting to say, sitting in the class and listen to someone lecture and lecture and lecture. You get a paper, and as soon as you walk off the stage, it has no value.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to demean the degree, but all I'm saying is I think if you're going to actually focus on peddling a degree as an institution, then you can no longer afford to have it static for 3-5 years and teach the same thing. All right. It needs to evolve. All right. So I know, for example, organizations write job descriptions. All right. Some of these job descriptions are 10, 20 years old. All right. Are you telling me nothing has changed all that time? And then you talk about evaluations being done, based on these jobs as such in terms of what content it has. I mean, which planet are we living on?
Yeah. But that could come to a difficult conversation, as we're talking about, having that conversation. Someone told me, I did a strategic talent acquisition course a while back here in Dubai, and one of the young ladies told me the story of a gentleman who had been in marketing, was like one of the big shots at marketing, had decided to leave. He had been there for like 10 years, but he was going back home or whatever it was. And when she was sitting talking with the hiring manager, he said, we just use the same job description. She said, 10 years of marketing? You can't use the same. She could not get the hiring manager to understand. I don't have time to go through and redo all of this. And he still wanted to hire from a different planet.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. But unfortunately, some of these younger talents who tend to be put down as Gen Y and Gen Zs as being lazy, as being this and that, all right, are coming up with some amazing insight. And we just are not listening because we're used to doing it the same way. We've done it every time. And unfortunately, as I keep telling my people when I'm training them, what brought you here will not take you to where you need to go. All right. So you just need to wake up to this new reality. You can't just diss them out. This is the future of your workforce.
Yeah. That's Marshall Goldsmith's book title. what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Tied into that same piece. So my thought was that the education system is broken. In some way, the skills development inside of an organization. If if Amazon lays off 30,000 people, and you got to go out and hire all these new people, how are you building the skills up so this won't happen again? And there were so many structures to it. I'll send you a copy of it because it's going to go live on tomorrow. But you're doing writing too, so and I read your articles every time something comes out. And I'm like, whoa, that's a different take. So my thought is this: I see things. I saw all the layoffs. I saw Amazon Tuesday morning. They were going to lay off 30,000 people, and I was thinking about that. I said, I can write something on that. What is your inspiration coming from when you write? Because your articles are storytelling. You're telling a story. You start up and said, okay, I'm wondering where this is going to go. That, bam! At the end of it, you wrapped it all up. Where does that inspiration come from?
Well, trust me, when I first started writing almost like a year and a half ago, I struggled with coming up with topics. And then one day I just had this kind of an experience where it was something that happened to me on the road. And it was just something that I took in and I started connecting it to business, to life in general. And I realized that I don't need to rethink the whole process. The experiences you face on a daily basis is there. And in fact, I'll let you into a secret. Once I have a topic, the subject just flows into my head. I write it within 5-10 minutes. Just getting to that subject, it probably takes me about half an hour to an hour. But the writing part is easy. So I use my inspiration, whether it's on the road, whether it's in business, whether it's my family sometimes. Sometimes I draw into my life experience in the workplace and all that kind of stuff. So I take it from everywhere. And as I mentioned, I read extensively. So when I see something that kind of hits me, I try and weave that into a small story. And that's the one thing that I tried very hard to do, is to try and keep it short. So I usually keep it to about 325 words. So it's not too hard a read. But one of the things you said to me, I think right at the outset, at the beginning of this year, is you need to convert these into videos. And I'm still grappling with that. So maybe I'll take some learnings from you on that one.
Yeah, Day is the person that can help you with that. I applaud the 300 words. Mine is normally, I try to stay at 1,000 words. And I say that because when I was writing every week for a website in US, when blogs first came out, the tagline was 1,200 words. So I had to stay within that. So now it's like 1,000 words and doing that. And I hadn't written for a while, thinking about things. And I reached out to the site that I used to write for, and I said, I'm getting back into the mood. Can I do twice a week? I'm gonna connect you to them also.
Sure.
ERE.net, who I write for, and I'll introduce you to the editor owner of it. And so here's another thing. Coming back to HR people, a young lady reached out to me and she says, I want to grow my career. I want to move to Dubai. I wanted to do this. So just as I was reading, I clicked on her LinkedIn profile, and there was absolutely nothing there. Job from here to here to here, title, nothing there. And I asked her, I said, send me some links to some of the work you've done. And she says, well, I've been kind of lazy as it relates to that. Can you talk about how you built the brand around a social brand, and whether you think that's needed today?
Well, I've never been one for social media, but I have to give credit to my wife. She kept telling me, listen, you're dealing with a different generation, all right? You need to be on social media. So one of the things that I have yet to sort of get into is Instagram, but I try and post my stuff on LinkedIn and Facebook as such. And I think the exposure I've had over the last sort of year and a half since I've started doing this has been immense. And for me, it's not about the likes. It's not about the number of people that read it. It's about the number of people that write to me personally and say, you know what, this really resonates with me. And I wish I'd known you earlier, all right, where I could have asked you for advice as such. That for me is what really success is all about. I mean, I can sit and count the likes. I mean, when I post a picture of a group that I've trained, for example, I get 1,500 hits, for example. But when I post my article, I get about 400 or 500 hits. Does that mean what I'm writing doesn't make a difference? Well, as far as I'm concerned, if it makes a difference to even one person, I've succeeded.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the way I view it as well. And it gives you exposure. I've met so many people who reach out to me offline, and you build up a network of people, and in doing that. So again, talking about generational kind of issues, I think and this is my thought, to grow your career today, you can work inside of a company and be the best person ever if that's what you want to do, and your model is to stay there for 30 years and leave. But if that's not, and it's not going to happen anymore, you've got to build a product. And my thought is that you become a product. And what are you putting out there? What are you writing about? And one of the things that I always like about your stories is that you start off one way and you're trying to figure, so where's it going to, and it gets, and the back end of it wraps it all up. So when in your bio, I mentioned storyteller. You are an excellent storyteller. Excellent.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I love stories, and that's what really gets me through presentations, because a lot of what we teach in our certified courses, for me, it's not about the slide deck. It's about the story behind that particular aspect. Yeah. And I think every time I walk away from a session, people keep telling me, I remember nothing of the theory. I remember your stories. Yeah. And that's superb.
Someone told me that the other week, and matter of fact, I mentioned to you, I'm headed to Saudi Arabia next week. They said that, I love your stories. Because I've had interesting jobs that I've worked for, and I can give you stories of Europe. I can give you stories of Africa, South Africa, and this keeps going on. And I think from my side, when you share an individual story, how it impacted and connects to the lesson that you're talking through, exactly what the young lady told you.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that, because one of the things that I also do, believe it or not, is I teach the art of storytelling. So the number of people that have done that course, whenever I've taught it, are like, we've never understood the power of storytelling. So for example, when you think about change management, right? Change management is about a process, yes, but at the same time, one of the most critical part of change is communication. And communication is not email, is not, the ability to just stand there and talk what the project is all about. It's about weaving a story around it. And that's what really matters. If you cannot emotionally connect with the audience, you're not going to sell it.
And that not only that has a whole lot more to do from business, and even in selling yourself on a job interview, or pitching a client or whatever it is, that you can weave the story into whatever it may be. So I had an interesting project I'm working on now, and we spent an hour or so on the phone the other day, and I sent them kind of a draft proposal. And as she read through it, one of the things she mentioned, she said, I love the tagline you used, because that kind of encapsulated everything. Like, wow, all the other page and a half, cool. But the tagline was the hook, in driving that. And so it's kind of like in the South where I grew up, you go fishing and you put bait on and you throw it out there. So do you see storytelling, that could be the title of that first paragraph, as the hook that's going to bring someone in?
Well, I've tried. Let me give you a perspective of a story that I tell quite extensively in my training, which again is based on my own analysis. When we were growing up, there was always one parent at home that looked after us, right? In some form or the other. Let's say in our cases, it was usually the father who worked and the mother was the homemaker as such. Yeah. But as we grew, we realized that we want to give our children what we never had. So from that perspective, we ended up having to have two incomes to make that work. All right. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But in most instances, what really transpired as a social outcome is we ended up having caretakers look after our kids. All right.
Yeah.
And when you think about it from that perspective, these are nice people. They do their level best, but at the same time, they're not us. All right. So that person becomes a role model in the early stages of them growing up. And eventually, when they have outlived their usefulness, they don't come back to us as parents. They go outside looking for a role model. When we pray and hope that this particular individual that they choose is the right one. But if it doesn't happen, all right, that's when, you start getting the phone calls, the blowback and everything as such for all the things they've done wrong. But then let's say they go through this phase, they graduate out of university, this young group of people, all right, enter into the workforce. And because we think of them as being incapable, because they want flexibility, they want to be a manager in 2 years' time, they want to earn X amount of money in terms of Gen Y and Gen Z, they want to work with technology, all right? When they enter the workforce, what do we do with them? We throw them into a disciplinary sort of corner that says, this is the way you need to do it, all right? And then we start, when we think, okay, they're making some progress, we throw a mentor at them and then a coach. Different spin to this. I want to say it's this young generation, when they come into the workforce, they don't need coaching and mentoring. They need parenting, because that's what they've missed out on. And the difference between coaching, mentoring, and parenting is about being there for them through their journey. All right. Coaching is about helping them find the solution themselves. Mentoring is about giving them a sense of direction. All right. But parenting is a very different ballgame. It's about helping them get to a stage where they learn to be comfortable, because a lot of these youngsters come into the workforce not as social animals because they're struggling, all right? They're not communicative the way we were. So when they enter, they're really struggling in that sense. So when somebody puts an arm around somebody and says, listen, my friend, I'm here. How do you want to tackle this, all right? Tell me, what is it you're struggling with? So it's about solving their stresses that may not necessarily be home related. All right. So I think this is something that I like to tell as a story, because it doesn't matter which part of the world you belong to, it's a common problem across the world.
It is. That's an interesting concept that you're talking about, because the DNA of the workforce is skewing younger. The people with the skills that we're going to need, it's going to be a younger person. But I think in a lot of cases, back to what you were saying, we should find to apply the older model to that younger dynamic. So I was giving a speech one time, and I said, and all these were talking about new generation coming in. They don't want to do this. I said, dude, here's my thought. You've got a new customer. If you had a customer that you depended on for 40% of your revenue, and they were asking and kind of telling you that we needed certain things, I said, you would adhere to that without talking all this side talk. So why not look at it in the same context of the new customer who's younger, different skill set. We need the skill set. How can we appease that skill set?
Yeah. Well, I think you and I've had this discussion before, but I prefer to look at
numerous times.
I prefer to look at individuals with regards to their strengths as opposed to their areas of development. I mean, if we keep just focusing on what they don't do well, all right, we actually miss out on the opportunity of what they're really geared to do. And when you think about it from a perspective of Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, all right, he prophesizes on this very, very, very much. And there's lots of studies out there that great organizations are not really about great leaders first. It's about great teams. All right. And great teams come together when you have teams that are built on complementary skills. All right. So once you get that model right, I think it becomes very powerful as a dynamic.
Yeah, it does. It does. I want to take a minute to kind of do a shout out for some of our guest listeners. Peter Piccinini, who was a prior guest, he started on Broadway, and now he's a wealth management expert. Manages millions. He manages wealth. Grady Bland, who's a friend of mine from Atlanta. Grady, you and I have been disconnected for a period of time. We've got to connect. I'm headed back to U.S. In 2-3 weeks, so we got to catch up then. And Ting Yen, thank you so much for listening in. A first-time listener, I appreciate you listening in, and Listen to us every Friday. We do the same thing here. And I think we've worked together. I think you may have been in one of my sessions that I did at some point in time, but we won't go into that now. So thank you everyone for listening in. As we begin to close out, I want to ask you a question. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give them?
I think one of the things that I learned a little late in my life was the ability to try and be more selective with the words that I used earlier on in my career. I think my impetuous younger self sometimes gave me a perspective that whatever I say, it will be understood correctly on the other side. And over time, I realized it is not as simple as that. So that's why I went down the journey of emotional intelligence, which gave me that foundation, which had I had earlier, I would have loved.
That's awesome as a closing statement. So to everyone that listened to us today, thank you for listening every Friday. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series, and your time and conversation and comments keeps it alive. We'll be back next Friday with another journey, because our tagline is behind every title is a story worth telling, and every story brings us closer to what leadership really means, as my friend Abdulhussain gave us kind of a master class on this today. So thank you so much. Abdulhussain, I need you to hang on for a second as we begin to close out.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate it. And thanks to all the listeners. And I'm sure you can find me on LinkedIn. If you actually want to reach out, talk to me, or actually just say something or comment and read my articles, please look me up. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic article, seal of approval.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay, hang on.
Take the CEO series with you anywhere, anytime. All episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership.